Hello, my name is Lisa Doe. I'm a family law attorney here at Beresford Booth. Today, I'm joined by Kelly Deis of Sounpoint Consulting. Kelly is a CVA, CDFA, CEPA. She does a variety of work, but in this webinar, we will be discussing her role as a financial specialist in a collaborative divorce. Kelly, thank you for joining me today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of work you do as relates to family law and collaborative divorces?
Sure. Yes, I've been doing this work for just over 10 years. My role is somewhat varied in the family law arena. I do business valuations for divorces. I do pension valuations, tracings. A lot of my work is as a financial neutral in the collaborative role, which we're talking about today, as well as I do mediation with couples, helping them resolve the financial aspects of their divorce as well.
So before we dive in, I want to explain briefly what is a collaborative divorce, and Kelly, definitely feel free to chime in. So the collaborative law process is a formal process outside of the court system, and it must be agreed to by spouses. And let me show this illustration. So this is the collaborative divorce flowchart. Each spouse needs a trained collaborative lawyer. And during this process, you form a collaborative divorce team, which includes the lawyers and then any professionals that are needed, such as a neutral financial specialist, which is Kelly's role. And the collaborative process entails four-way meetings, and you'll see them listed in the flowchart with the spouses and the attorneys. And the goal is to reach a settlement agreement through these meetings. And you can see in the flow chart that the financial specialist or analyst, kind of use that word interchangeably, attends the second, third, and fourth meetings. But, each process can kind of vary. So maybe there'll be more meetings or less meetings, and perhaps the financial specialist would only attend certain ones that are relevant. The process is interest-based. So most critical is the needs and interests of spouses and their children. And other goals of the process are to reduce conflict, allow spouses to advocate for themselves, and self-determine their own outcome. And this is all done with the support of a professional team. And the process also allows for creative solutions, which may not be the case in traditional litigation. During the process, attorneys and spouses cannot go to court or threaten to go to court. So that pressure is taken off, and most cases do settle. Generally, it's less expensive than litigating in court and going to trial. Anything you want to add, Kelly?
No, I think that you said it well.
Okay, so let's get started. Kelly, can you tell us how long you've been doing work as a financial specialist, specifically in collaborative divorces?
Yes, probably since around 2013, which is when I really started to take off. Interestingly, I actually got my CDFA years prior to that. I had gone through my own divorce and realized that there needed to be a better way, and that I really saw a need for people going through divorce having some outside financial support, and other than what one typically just received in the normal course. So I actually got my CDFA back in 2009, but I had never heard of the collaborative law, which would have been perfect for me had I known, and had it actually been kind of a little bit more had more traction at the time than it does now. So while I got the CDFA in 2009, I actually didn't do much with it until I became introduced into the collaborative community closer to 2013.
Okay. And so how did you start beginning to do this work? You said you got, and I love that story because I feel like you can really empathize with spouses going through the divorce process. So you had your CDFA, and then you were introduced to collaborative law. So how did you start acting as a financial specialist?
Well, essentially just getting on cases, meeting collaborative law attorneys and getting the, kind of having them take the leap of faith rather of actually getting you on a case and up and running. In a perfect world, there'd be maybe a little bit more training for collaborative professionals in the financial world, because it is a little bit of on-the-job training. But essentially, just on cases, and you understand the process and methodology, what's needed. There's a lot of interaction between the attorneys, the experienced collaborative attorneys in the financial professional early on, in terms of what's needed, what's expected, and you pull all the tools out of your toolbox and get going.
And so do you think it's fair to say, like, you believe in this collaborative process?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I think that having a holistic view of your finances is critical and is not necessarily, it's not there in all cases necessarily. So having that is critical. Having a collaborative team, the container, is very beneficial for the right clients. That holds them in terms of their emotions, has their goals and interests forefront. Because you could have, a very fair settlement, but it may or may not meet the goals and interests of the individuals, to which it's serving. So to have the collaborative world, where your focus is truly on the needs and interests of the parties, I think, goes a long way to making the agreement durable and also satisfactory to both parties, in which then they can move on in their lives in two homes, and if there's kids, make some really better co-parents.
I really like that analogy of like a container, because that's sort of like the safe space for the spouses, but also what you said about like having a holistic view or transparency. It's important for both parties to have transparency, particularly in terms of finances. And so what are the requirements to becoming a financial specialist?
Well, obviously you need good financial acumen. So there is the CDFA, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, which in the collaborative community in Seattle is somewhat of a prerequisite. And it is, I do think it's really important. It gives you a good overview of the financials, what's entailed in a divorce from the financial aspect. It has its own code of standards, and then it also has the continuing education. So I think that's important. And I think it's, really important that whoever does this work, no matter what their certifications are or aren't, is that they're committed to it. As you guys all know, there's lots of nuances when you're going through a financial settlement. And there's the more experience you have, the more situations you've seen, the better you can handle it. So, to me, the most important, the CDFA is important, but also having experience and having, seen a lot of different situations, I think is equally important.
So I'm glad you defined what CDFA is, because we were just kind of throwing that term around for those of you who may not know. But I agree with you, like you said, right? A critical part of it is just having that experience in a collaborative divorce arena, because there's different skills that you're using. Like you can have the financial background, but in terms of how to interact with parties or present financial information in a neutral way, that's really critical in a collaborative divorce. So the big question for you is, what do financial specialists do, specifically in a collaborative divorce?
Okay, so what we do is we work with both of the clients initially, and we get the all of their documents and information in one spot, and we verify. So we do the initial property report. So that includes getting all of the information on real estate, bank accounts, pensions, etc., and help and compile the initial property statement with values in it and or placeholder values in it, depending on what the asset is, such as real estate. You may just put in a placeholder value and get it formally appraised or not in the future. But at least putting in some values, having that first property report to really look at and understand. You know, as part of that process is really understanding kind of what else needs to further evaluation if they should so choose, such as, you know, was there a 401k in existence prior to the marriage or not? You know, are there pensions? Are there, you know, assets like that that they may or may not want further information on? And that's the thing with collaborative, is all those decisions are in the client's hands. You know, they may say, yeah, I had a 401k prior to the marriage, but we're gonna call it all community, or we're gonna call it all separate, or we're gonna divide it X, Y, and Z. So those decisions are absolutely in the client's court. But part of my job is to at least flag them and bring them to their attention so that the conversation can happen. The other thing that the financial specialist does is really understand the income and expenses of the two spouses. You know, from which you would then start to have the conversation later in terms of what kind of support there may or may not be. So that's kind of the baseline framework from which to have these conversations. Then once you get into the meetings, our role is really to help illustrate and articulate what the clients would like to see. And so they may have one or two or three different, call them scenarios or options of financial settlements that they'd like to consider. You know, one spouse keeps the house, or the house is sold. You know, the pension is valued, the pension is not valued, etc. So we help illustrate what those scenarios look like. And then that helps facilitate the conversation, because once you see it on paper, you know, it's easier to talk in concrete terms about what does or doesn't work for the clients. And a lot of those conversations are led by the financial specialist. You know, we're in those joint meetings. So okay, you know, these are the three different scenarios. What does or doesn't work for you in each of these? And you know, if you tweak it this way or that way, you know, how do you react to that? And those tweaks are typically also given by the clients.
And so when you say scenarios, you're talking about different options to divide assets and debts. Is that correct?
Correct. And also different support options. You know, you may have a monthly support, you might have a lump sum, or, you know, any number of different, you know, different ways to have a transfer moving forward.
So like spousal or maintenance, spousal support or
Correct.
maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can say that having worked with Kelly in a collab case, she does all the heavy lifting, right? She gets the financial information, she puts the scenarios together, and she does lead those conversations in terms of finances and options to divide property. So, I mean, to summarize, would you say your goals as a financial specialist is to obtain all this information, prepare the property report, prepare scenarios, including, I guess, options for spousal support? Anything I missed?
Yes, and also facilitating the conversations that are going to get the clients moving closer to an agreement. You know, and that's you know, that's a lot of what we do, is really trying to you know, have the objective kind of facilitating conversation to help them move forward.
And so, as we both know, right, in a collaborative divorce, there's like no mandatory professionals that need to be on board. It's a decision made by the collaborative lawyers and the parties. So when is a financial specialist needed?
well, in my opinion, pretty much in every case. So there are cases where there have been, the issue with including or not including a financial specialist is sometimes you may think you may not need one, and then you find out that you do. That is a little bit more challenging for the financial specialist rather than the flip side. So for me personally, I would prefer to come in early on the case, and then you decide you don't need me, and that's fine. Coming in after the process has already gotten underway, and there's information exchanged, and there's assumptions that have been made, and conversations that have been had, and kind of stakes in the ground. It's a little more challenging because you come in and you have to kind of catch up as to where everyone else is, and it may or may not be. There may be adjustments that need to be made. So, it's hard for me to say when they aren't needed. For the most part, unless it's just a super simple property division, no kids, you probably don't need one. But I think we're helpful.
No, I agree. I think in most cases, except if it's, very minimal or simple assets, a financial specialist is going to be needed. And a huge benefit from my standpoint in terms of having a financial specialist is that neither party questions their motives, right? Because the specialist is neutral. Versus if an attorney does the numbers, then the attorneys are reviewing all the financial documents to prepare that report. The other spouse may say, well, they're advocating for their client. They're not looking out for my best interest. And so that to me is a huge plus.
Well, one other note on that is it's counterintuitive, but sometimes the cases that you need as financial specialists on are the ones with the lower asset cases. And what I've seen sometimes is, in it obviously everything depends on the parties, but sometimes in the lower asset cases, every dollar counts, right? And so people are really looking in some cases for that, finer level of detail to get, to understand where that last, $2,000 goes. It's important, right? Sometimes in the higher asset ones, those kinds of nuances are rounding errors, and depending on the parties, of course, they may or may not care. So it's very counterintuitive, and it's something I've kind of learned as I've gone is, the lower asset cases you may think are easy and simple, but sometimes they just aren't.
Yeah. That's a good point to make. And so I think it's really case by case to evaluate, and we're generally in agreement most of the time what's going to be needed. Can you describe, very briefly, what are your interactions with the parties? Do you email? Do you meet with them? Do you meet with them together? And then in general, what kind of information do you need from them? Is it bank statements? Is it what is it specifically?
Yeah, so my process is such that I always do an intro call with the clients just so we know who each other are and answer any questions and discuss the process. Then I have at least one working meeting with them prior to the first joint session. And that working meeting is really just fact-based, making sure we have the lay of the land correct. So making sure the property statement is as complete as possible, as accurate as possible, making sure if there's any additional information needed that we have plans in place to get that. My role in that is really, not just to discuss anything that would have a broader implication. I'm often asked, what does data separation mean, and what are the pros and cons, and what is it, how do you kind of the deeper conversation around pension valuations, so that type of thing. And I always table those kinds of conversations for the joint session, because that's the kind of thing you want everybody to hear at the same time and have the same information, and in many cases need attorney input. So that first meeting is really just kind of the lay of the land, making sure we have the facts correct, so that when we do have that first joint session, it's efficient. We're not spending time going through each line item, wondering if we have all the most up-to-date and current information. After that, I can easily go through the rest of the process without meeting with the clients independently at all my interaction being within the joint session. And whether or not I do meet with them independently is really on a case-by-case basis, and it could be with or without the attorney. It could be together, it could be separate, it could be helping the less financially savvy spouse, get a better, deeper understanding of what it is that we're looking at. It could be helping them play through a couple different scenarios that they want to look at independently. It could be, some outside of analysis in terms of maybe it's a reimbursement of community of expenses spent, that type of thing. But by and large, so that's really on a case-by-case basis. And like I said, it's just a, very straightforward case. I could easily not meet with them outside of the joint sessions at all.
And I know, having worked together before, that, I mean, if a spouse reaches out to you for what, they need more explanation or whatever the case may be, you of course are willing to discuss with them and answer their questions, and you make sure that the other side knows about it, and you maintain neutrality. So it's really based on the needs of the spouses as well. You previously mentioned, like, you gather information about expenses, and I'm assuming like living expenses. And so why, and I guess we call it a budget. Why is that important?
Well, when we have the conversation around spousal support, it becomes important. And as everyone knows, spousal support can be elusive in terms of what the right number is and how you get to it. So having kind of more information around it rather than less, I find is helpful, because some people, there's a million different ways to come up with the spousal support number that would work for the couples. But having some concrete numbers on a page can often be helpful, because they can then look at it and say, okay, well, with that support number, I'm running at a surplus. So with that support number, I'm still running at a deficit. And so it really helps frame the conversation around that, and gives people some grounding in terms of and some visibility and comfort into, okay, given all this, I can make my budget work, or given all this, I can't. So, what are we going to do? So it just really helps frame the question, and it also really, puts those support numbers. It gives them some grounding, and it gives both spouses some understanding of what their financial future looks like, at least from a cash flow perspective going forward.
And I've seen parties who said, I have no idea what my monthly expenses are. And I've seen you work with them, right? Looking at bank statements and seeing what their spending is, and thinking, like, trying to estimate after separation, if they're going to have housing, what is the average cost, things like that. So I've seen you help parties prepare their budget. This has gone way too fast, but I want to touch on this before we end. Can you tell us some of the key factors in terms of preparing the financial property report? What's included? What are you looking for when you're preparing that?
Well, it's, really is all the usual suspects. It's the real estate, it's understanding if there's any stock options out there, pensions, the retirement accounts, the personal property. So it's basically what I look at is the if they have an appraised value of the home, which they typically don't at this point, kind of what's the placeholder value for that. In terms of the bank statements, I typically just look at the most recent statement, understanding that they may need to get updated later down the process. Any kind of life insurance policies that they have, pensions, retirement accounts, debt, obviously, credit cards, car loans.
I mean, in terms of finances, I think that financial property report is the most key important piece of the puzzle. It really provides a framework in terms of, hey, we need to go and get this value. We need to get this appraised. And that's what you use, right, to create the scenarios for the parties to be able to start discussing how to divide assets and debt. So, I mean, I feel like it's a critical piece, and that's all on you to prepare and to get the information to do that. So thank you so much for joining me today. I want to get your contact information up. And so here's Kelly's information. If anybody wants to contact her, her email, she's at Sounpoint Consulting, and her phone number. And my information is there as well. Anything else you would like our audience to know about, I guess, your role or collaborative divorces in general?
No, I think you did a great job covering kind of all the bases. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. I actually wish we had more time. I have several more questions for you. So thanks again, and we'll have to have you back.
Okay, you take care. Thank you.